Hey, this is Thom Zahler, creator of Long Distance, and you are listening to the GeekCast Radio Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, TFG and Mike here from the GeekCast Radio Network.
Ooh. Technical difficulties. Let's move on, shall we?
Have you been listening to my comic podcast, The Pull Bag, on the GCRN? We've been going strong since 2013, and now I'm putting a call out to you, the internet. Here's your chance to tell your comic reading stories. I'm looking for podcasters who read, collect, or are otherwise involved in comics. Comic writers, artists, enthusiasts, anyone. So, if you want to jump inside the pull bag and be on an Origins episode, there are only 5 requirements. You must be over the age of 21. We are an explicit network. You must have a decent sounding microphone set up. You must have 6 months to 1 year of podcasting experience. You must have 30 minutes to an hour to podcast. And number 5, and most importantly, you must have fun. If you can meet all these requirements, then send an email to feedback@geekcastradio.com. In the subject line, put TPB Origins Guest Appearance and your name, nickname, or online handle, whatever you choose to use. And as always, make your great escape into comics. I have been TFG and Mike for the Pull Bag and the GCRN. Unleash the geek in you.
I'm not hearing this.
Hello and welcome to the Pull Bag. I'm, of course, TFG and Mike, your host from the GeekCast Radio Network. And today, this actually happened within the last week or so. Actually, I would probably say the last 7 days. I found, and I honestly have no idea how I found it, but usually when I find comic series, new comic series to read on Comixology, I'll sit there and read them, and I'll go through them, whatever they are, if it's 1 or 2 issues at first, or if it's, a 4-issue miniseries or whatever it is. I'll go through and I'll read them and be like, oh, okay, well, I wonder if the creators are on Twitter, or Facebook, or whatever else, And this past Labor Day weekend, I think I said Memorial Day weekend a minute ago. Oh, boy, I'm losing my mind over here. Labor Day weekend, because this is September, thank God. I found a series from IDW, ironically. I didn't even know IDW did these kind of books. 4-issue miniseries called Long Distance. And this is done by artist-writer or writer-artist, however he prefers, whichever first, Thom Zahler. Hello, Tom. How are you?
Fine. How are you? Sorry, it's Zahler.
Well.
Short A.
Zahler. Okay, sorry.
Everyone does it. Don't worry.
Tom is actually just back from Dragon Con, so
Yeah,
nice
so
to know
just
that
sobered up.
set you on fire. Just sobered up, yeah. Oh boy. So you went to Dragon Con. How was that, first of all?
Dragon Con was amazing. It's come to be one of my favorite shows for a bunch of reasons. This year I was able to do a little more than I had in previous years. A little more social networking, just hanging out and playing card games and having dinners and things like that because of where I was staying before, things of that nature I wasn't able to. So I think this was definitely my most fun Dragon Con. This is my 5th one. So
very cool, very cool. All right. Where did you grow up, and did you always want to get into being an artist or a writer?
So I grew up in Northeast Ohio in a place called Timberlake. I've lived here most of my life, and I've always known I wanted to do this. I was reading from the age of 2.5. I don't ever remember not reading. I don't remember not reading comics, and I don't remember not knowing that this is what I wanted to do.
What kind of comic was 2.5-year-old Tom reading at the time?
Probably Superman. Superman
Really?
Action Comics. Those are the ones. Yeah, I remember correcting my dad about what how to say wrath in an issue of ISIS when I was 7. So I was pretty far along. But yeah, it was just my dad actually was one who started it, and he read a book on kids and said the book said there's no reason a 2-year-old can't read. It's just that you don't teach him. So it was almost Machiavellian. He got a phonics book, and he ran phonics drills with me, but he would only do 2 or 3 pages. Because, when you're a kid and you're spending time with your dad, it's awesome. And then he would stop after 3 pages and I'd go, oh, we can do more. And he's like, no, we'll do more tomorrow. So he trained me to want to keep going with this. Right. And yeah, just I've always been able to. I don't remember a time when I didn't. So.
Mm-hmm. So as you were growing up, as a kid, and once you hit your teen years and all that stuff, what comics drew you in outside of Superman?
Firestorm was Firestorm was my entry level book because I had read Superman, loved Justice League. I have a great collection of that stuff, but Firestorm was the first book that in issue 1 came out when I was collecting, because back then they didn't keep rebooting titles with issue 1. So yeah. It was getting in on the ground floor. That's what I mean by entry level. And of course DC canceled it 5 issues later, but I really like that character, and I like so much of what the dynamic between the young kid and the older professor, and the fact that the least qualified guy is driving the boat. There's just so much to Firestorm that I think is interesting. And then I made it through the 80s DC cultural renaissance and around Crisis, and after that, which is it's a lot of my favorite stuff, and is when I think they were firing on all cylinders. They had stuff like The Question and the Shadow miniseries and Dark Knight and Watchmen, and Crisis itself was really good, and History of the DC Universe, and they were just doing all sorts of interesting things, and they hadn't completely started deconstructing superheroes and getting to that point like the Marvel movies do, where they apologize for being superheroes. I'm wearing a costume. They call me Ant-Man. What are you going to do? Because there's a certain nature of comics where you just accept it. It's just part of it. And the 80s still, there was a really wide range of stuff. Not all the Batman books were obsessively grim and gritty. There's that great run by Mike Barr and Alan Davis on Detective. That's just, it's some of the best Batman stuff ever. And it's completely accessible. It's a little more adult than Batman had been up to that point, probably, but it wasn't exclusionary, which I think is something that comics are missing these days. It's a high bar to shoot for, but I want to write Star Wars for the most part, because when you can see Star Wars at 7 and it's a fantastic movie, and you can see it at 37 and it's still a fantastic movie. It doesn't insult its audience. It's not the happy little elves or something like that. It has something for everybody without putting anything in that keeps people from being able to see it. There's no scene like in The Kingsman at the end where you're like, oh, so this is completely inappropriate for anyone under 17.
Yeah, you mentioned Star Wars, and all I can think of is, and we'll talk about this much later in the interview, but all I can think of is Carter's line, as long as it doesn't end with an Ewok. Oh, man. Yeah, I mean, comics today there are a lot of good books out there. Don't get me wrong, there are. But specifically with the big two, somebody needs to put a boot in their reboot.
Yeah, especially DC continuity is like the weather. If you don't like it, it's going to change.
Yeah, pretty much.
And I don't know how much of it is like a rock star mentality that has gotten into the industry. Because it used to be that if you got hired to write Superman, it was your job to write a Superman story. Now you get hired to write Superman, it's like, what's your take on Superman? I'm like, well, the character's been around for 70 years. I think that's pretty well established. When you get hired to write on the 100 or Supernatural, you don't suddenly turn Supernatural into a musical comedy. You write Supernatural stories. You find your own voice on it, but you still write the thing that you have. And comics these days seem like every time they get a new creative team, they change the book entirely. And that leads to a lot of inconsistency. And it means that every jumping on point is a jumping off point.
Pretty much. Because I'll tell you right now, I've only been reading comics full-time since 2012. My buddy Steve, co-creator of the GCRN with me, he went out and he got Batman number 13, which was the start of the Death of the Family story arc. And sat there and wrote a review on our website, and I'm like, oh, okay, so it's the Joker, and all I had in my head was, Mark Hamill's voice, and I'm like, okay, I gotta go look into this. I gotta go to my local comic shop and check this issue out, and ever since then, I've just been slowly expanding. For a while, I've primarily been mostly DC. I have jumped into some Marvel, but not much. I want to get into more. Right now, my Marvel reading pretty much consists of the Star Wars books that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of those things where when I jumped into DC and I'm like, oh, Batgirl, okay, that'll work. And we had 34 great issues. And it wasn't... People say the Gail Simone Batgirl run was dark and dreary and had a dark tone. And I mean, I can see it does in the art and in some of the stories, but she threw a lot of comedy at that. I mean, it wasn't a, upbeat story. It wasn't a happy-go-lucky story, but it still had a lot of funny moments in it. And then, oh, hey, at issue 35, new creative team, new artist, new design. We're putting her in some subjugated version of Gotham called Burnside or whatever the heck. And I dropped it immediately. I just couldn't. I can't even go back and read those first 5 issues, 35 to 40 anymore.
I gotta admit, I haven't checked them out. The reboot of Batgirl seemed really fun and interesting to me, and it is more of what I would like to see DC do. But
yeah.
It kind of becomes like Superman Returns, where suddenly 5 years have taken place and everybody is 10 years younger. It seemed like they should have started with that in New 52 rather than done what they did.
Yeah. Well, we could always have Memphis Reigns, Superman Lives. Oh, wait, no, we can't. All right. Now, I know you've done a lot of stuff with IDW. I know you've done some stuff at Marvel. What were you working on at Marvel when you were working for them?
Oh, my Marvel work has been really, really limited. I lettered Crimson Dynamo as part of the Epic line.
Mm-hmm.
That is my biggest Marvel Comics credit is lettering for them. I worked for Toon Tumblers, so I designed the glasses that had Spider-Man, Captain America, and the Avengers on them, and I've written an episode of the Spider-Man animated series, Spider-Man Web Warriors, which has aired in England but not in the United States. So my NDA is up on it, and I can say things, but it's still politically, I'm not going to spoil the ending.
But right. Can you say what the title of the episode is?
Oh,
so
yeah,
we can
yeah.
Look out for it?
For a while, I took the NDA so seriously because it was my first professional animation credit, where I said, look, I can't tell you anything about it. I can't tell you if Spider-Man's in it. You can make a guess about that, but I'm not going to confirm it. So now I can tell you that it is Contest of Champions, Part 1. It is part of the season finale, and I got to write Spider-Man and the Hulk and Iron Man, and it was just so cool. The weird part to me, amongst the many weird parts of me finally getting to write animation, was who voices the characters. Because Adrian Passar plays Iron Man on the show, and Adrian Passar, among his many credits, did a show in the 90s called Prophet, which is just phenomenal. I can't tell you how much I enjoy it. It is a show that literally, if it came out 5 years later and it was on HBO, we would all be talking about how awesome that 7-year series was and buying the Blu-ray box set. The world was not ready for it, and Fox certainly wasn't ready for it. But so I've followed his career since then because I think he was just magnetic in that role. And to realize that he has to say things that I wrote, that's it. It's just amazing. There was supposed to be a J. Jonah Jameson scene in it too that wound up getting cut, and the idea that J.K. Simmons, so I went completely freelance in 2001, the very end of 2001. In fact, it was right after September 11th because there's no better time to break out on your own than when the economy goes into free fall, and So I was freelance for about 5 months when Spider-Man came out, and there's that great line which I just bonded with way too much, where Peter Parker is trying to sell his photos to Jonah, and Jonah buys them, and Peter Parker says, "So I'm hired?" And Jonah looks at him and says, "Hired? No, freelance. That's the thing for a boy your age." Yeah. So I can't complain about Adrian Passar and James Arnold Taylor and a few other. All the actors were great, but it's just part of me is like, J.K. Simmons, he's Jonah Jameson. He's on Law and Order. He does the Farmers commercials. But yeah, that's the part I wasn't ready for. Is people whose career I followed having to say words that I wrote.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. He ever since. I look at J. Jonah Jameson in two ways. I look at him. I don't have the information in front of me, ladies and gentlemen, so you're just going to have to figure it out on your own. I look at him in the 94 Spider-Man the Animated Series. I like that voice actor that voiced him then. And then there's J.K. Simmons. There's no other two people in the entire world that should ever do J. Jonah Jameson. And ever since J.K. has done it, whenever he hasn't been J. Jonah Jameson, I'm like, don't even try. Just don't even.
You notice we didn't see him in the Andrew Garfield movies.
Yeah, I know. They teased and teased and teased. It as much as I enjoyed the Andrew Garfield movies, because in my personal opinion, Andrew Garfield is a much better Peter Parker than Tobey Maguire. At this point, the Andrew Garfield movies almost don't even matter anymore. I know that people enjoyed them. I know people liked them. I know certain people didn't like them, but with this new deal with Sony and Marvel and whatever, I don't know. The politics that is comic book movies is something that I just so stay away from, because it's just it's just so infuriating to me. I don't even want.
Tell me about it. Why is there not a Love and Capes TV show? That's my question.
Or an animated series, at least. I mean, oh man, I could so see. All right, now, so you mentioned Love and Capes. Was this your very first creator-owned series?
It was not. I did a book called Raider, which shows you how successful it was that you asked that question. Raider was the first thing I did freelance. I self-published it. It was an action-adventure spy book, kind of Shield Hydra with one guy caught in the middle. It did.
Does he have a whip?
Okay. No, it was black and white. But he was the character I created when I was like 13, and I thought this was going to be my magnum opus. And I did what everybody who does their first project does: is you do volume 1 of what you're sure is going to be a 20-part series. You're just going to jump out the gate and become Terry Moore. And I did 3 volumes of it. They did well, but by the time of the third one, I knew I didn't have it in me to do a fourth, because you don't want to. One of my feelings about self-publishing is that you don't print the book saying, okay, well, when I make my money back, you go. It's like going to Vegas. You assume you're not making any of it back, and then you figure out how to make it work past that. Because financially, I don't want to be spending a $3,000 printing bill that I think I'm going to get back. It's better for me to assume that that's gone and then try to get it back. People who read the book seem to like it. The artwork's not bad. There's still a lot of it that I'm proud of, but it was me trying to do much more DC House style, which is what I had grown up on, and I hadn't yet done quite as much cartooning, at least not that people knew about. I do caricatures, I do private parties, and I was doing a lot of magazine illustration and newspaper illustration, and those were all really cartoony, and I found I liked it, but it wasn't appropriate for the Raider comic. So when I was wrapping up the third one, I was trying to think of what I was going to do next, and this will tie into a couple things. I'm going to probably blow half the questions on your list right now. So there was this TV show on Bravo called Situation Comedy, and it was essentially a Project Greenlight for sitcoms. And I said, hey, I'm gonna do this. And I had 2 ideas, and one of them was a superhero romantic comedy, and one of them was a comedy about a couple in a long distance relationship. So the thing I wrote was the long distance relationship. I did it as a sitcom pitch. Wrote the spec for the first show, and in the process of doing that, and in the process of the last issue of Raider, where Raider has a evil femme fatale foe named Agent Vega, and the two of them have this kind of Batman Catwoman relationship, and I just liked writing that banter so much. And it was one of those things where you're like, why am I not doing more of this? This is exactly what you're supposed to be doing. It's not that it's easy, but it feels effortless and it's fun and it's worth the work and all that kind of stuff. So I put a lot of that in long distance, and then when I got to Love and Capes, it just went to another level. And with Love and Capes, the thing I figured is that I was going to do one issue. I wanted to have something out that I could sell at Comic-Con, and I'd found a printer that was willing to work with me on price, and I thought it'd be fun. And as opposed to Raider, I said, I'm going to do one issue. This is what I'm setting up. If it goes well, I'll do 6. And then the promise I kept making to myself every time I did another arc, and I had originally Love and Capes was supposed to be a trilogy. And then I realized that it wasn't going to work as a trilogy because there was way too much ground to cover from the time they get married to the time that they have a kid, which I would say is a spoiler, but the 4th volume is called What to Expect, and Abby is pregnant on the cover, and the chances of doing a hilarious miscarriage scene are pretty low. So yes,
no, don't.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
For those of us who lived through Funny About Love with Gene Wilder and Mary Stuart Masterson, what was Leonard Nimoy thinking?
Live long and prosper. That's what he was thinking.
He wrote a book about his film experience, and Funny About Love was the one I wanted to know much more about because Leonard Nimoy is really funny, and I wanted to know, where did this go off the rails? How did this go wrong? And basically he's like, and then I did Funny About Love, and it wasn't very good. I'm like, no, that's not. No, I have so many more questions about that one. What are you doing?
That's not an acceptable answer.
There's an NDA involved, isn't there? You can't talk about what happened. So yes, they have a kid, and I realized that I needed to do. I needed to make the newlywed year its own year, and then I needed to make the pregnancy year its own year. So it's a quadrilogy. But I feel like I need to keep my audience's expectations in mind when I do a series, because I don't want to do what I did with Raider again, where I essentially said, I'm going to tell you this really, really long, awesome story. And like, I ran out of money and nobody's buying it, so I'm not going to finish that now. So with Love and Capes, it was always very compartmentalized, where if any 6th issue were the last issue I did, it would still be a satisfying conclusion. It's not that there aren't more stories, but I got you to a point where it's going to be clean. I feel this way about TV, and like How I Met Your Mother, which I'm a big fan of, actually had it planned out this way. So if you watch How I Met Your Mother, the 13th episode is actually designed to be the season finale. If they had been canceled, they could have turned that into the finale and gotten to exactly where they were trying to get in the first, by the time the series ended. And I think you kind of need to have those breakpoints, because there's a lot of stuff that could happen. You don't know if the book is going to be successful enough to do more, and leaving people hanging is how many science fiction shows have we all watched that were like, oh, what's happening? Why have they never resolved what's happening with this story? So that is so frustrating to me. I try to make sure that I don't leave that for anyone else anymore.
Yeah. All right. So Love and Capes. I am just now getting into that series. I found, like I said at the beginning of the interview, I found Long Distance first, and I plowed through that, man.
I appreciate that.
I sat here on, like I said, Labor Day weekend. I think it was Friday or Saturday, 4th, 5th, or 6th of September, and the first 3 issues are $1.99 on Comixology.com. Bought all 3 of them. I'm like, oh, okay, so there's going to be a 4th issue, and then I saw somebody tweet to you about receiving one of your prizes for the prints for Long Distance, and I'm like, ooh, I want one of those. I was like, oh, I want one of those, and I said something else about it, and I can't remember off the top of my head. So I think it was you had said you had replied to me, oh, well, you'll find out, how to win one if you look in the, you'll look in the comic and whatever else. Well,
Yeah,
the
it's a
information
secret.
about that, the information about that stuff is not in the digital versions.
Oh no, it's not. It's a secret contest. If you can figure out how to enter it, you win.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, there's no explanation of how to enter the contest.
Yes. So I'm sitting here, and I'm like, oh, okay, so there's going to be a fourth issue, which actually just released this past Wednesday before we recorded this interview. And I'm like, oh, so that means there's going to be more issues as it goes along. And you said, oh, no, it's done. And I'm like, oh, man, because as of this recording, I'm still in the middle of my write-up of the series for Long Distance, and I've read the first 3 issues like 6 times in less than a week. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Because I want to be able to make sure I can reference stuff and keep the story going. How I'm writing it is I'm telling someone who comes onto my site and reads the review, I'm telling them what's going on in the book, and then I'm making comments of how I think your art or your writing is doing on that. Okay, issue 2. At the end of issue 2 of Long Distance, and there's spoilers here, people, but that issue's been out for a while. So, at the end of issue 2, we get to a point where Carter and Lee, the 2 main characters, they've overslept again, and they're about to, Lee's about to miss her flight home to Chicago from Carter living in Columbus. And it ends with, whatever we do next time, let's just try not to be late and, deal. And then it ends. And the issue 3 picks up with, oh, we got to get to the airport. And so it's one of those things where, when I started off the issue, because it's all one big giant review, so I started off the issue, and I'm like, okay, so this is what's going on. And then I put a thought of, oh, okay, so this is what I think of what is going on. And I mean, Long Distance is... People, if you're tired... Don't get me wrong. I know people love superhero comics. I know people love the IDW Transformers and Turtles comics. I love the IDW Transformers and Turtles comics. Turtles a little bit more. But it's one of those things where Long Distance is by far the most refreshing comic series I've read since 2012. It's by far the best. And it's not just because you're sitting here talking to me. I've said this on Twitter. I've been tweeting about this series of yours for a week and a half now. It's like, how you look on someone's Twitter and they'll talk about, oh, I had this for lunch or I had this for dinner. Oh, I got to go. Half of my tweets in the past 7 days, as of this interview is being recorded, are probably about Long Distance.
Wow.
When I jump into anything and I really like it, I really jump into it. So once Love and Capes was kind of done and you finished with that portion of your comic career kind of thing, did you immediately go and say, oh, let's do How did Long Distance come about after doing Love and Capes?
I took a break. I took far too long a break. I started working on some of the My Little Pony books, which I still do. I still write them. I'd written and drawn an issue when they first debuted. I did the Twilight Sparkle issue. And I was picking up a little bit more comic book work, which was keeping me busier from doing Long Distance. And the Spider-Man episode I actually wrote 2 years ago. To show you what that, to show you what that process is like. Yeah, it was almost 2 years ago this week. So, so I knew I wanted to do something new, but I wasn't sure exactly what. And IDW has a great. Sorry, that's a wrong tense. I have a great relationship with IDW. They seem to appreciate me in a way which kind of humbles me, and they want to keep doing things with me. So I gave them pitches for 3 ideas that I had, and they said, we think you should do Long Distance. And I said, okay, then I will. And I spent a little too much time getting off the ground because the thing that happens is that it's the first couple pages, it's the first issue that kills you. Although that actually wasn't the case on Long Distance. But the first issue is just so hard. And with Love and Capes, every page of Love and Capes is designed to have 2 jokes on it. It's got an 8-panel grid format. Every 4 panels is a joke. And I could send that out to my friends, who I call the Secret Society of Super Reviewers, and they could let me know that hey, this is really funny, this is going well, I think you need to do this, where you got enough feedback where you figured you were on an okay path. With Long Distance, because it is much more typical comic book structure, and actually the issues are 44 pages because I'm an idiot. And so,
yeah, I was like, and I'm not complaining here. I'm not complaining. I was like, wait a second, issue number 4, $4.99. What the heck? And then I realized, oh, it's 45 something pages. Wow. Okay. That makes sense.
All said and done, it's about 8 normal comic book issues worth of material. I saw one review that said this could have been 5 or 6 issues, and I'm like, I think I would have died. So once you get going, you go pretty well, but it's those first steps, and I'm trying to be very, very conscious of not taking quite so long on whatever I do next. There's a point where, especially with deadlines and doing a stupid number of comic book conventions and traveling out to LA for weeks and things like that, I was actually drawing 4 pages a day of Long Distance near the end. Wow. And that is an insane pace. And the thing that happens, though, is that I've got a 5-page story for something that I can't talk about, but I got a 5-page story I'm working on, and I can't seem to get this thing drawn. I'm like, this was a day and a half to you last week. Why is it taking you so long to draw? But it's something new, and you figure out different problems and different ways to tell the story, and that's the kind of thing that it makes it interesting, but it makes it challenging. So. And being a writer, artist, creator, my process isn't always the cleanest. So I was talking with a friend, and I'm not going to out her because actually this is going to sound really arrogant when I say it, but I apologize for that. She was asking me how I plotted out Long Distance as compared to how she works on her book, where she would go to a coffee shop and write a script. And I'm like, yeah, I just pretty well start on page 1, and then I keep going. And then I end it, and then I do another book. Some of it is that I have been reading comics for so long that I think in 22 to 44 page increments. I've also noticed that when I write scripts, I can bring them in with a couple of pages of what they need to be, because apparently my brain just thinks in 44-minute dramatic increments. But yeah, I write my books mostly on Post-it notes. So it's enough for me to know what's going on and to break down the pages. And I always know how the issue is going to end. You know, I know I always knew how every issue of Long Distance was going to end. And the big problem for me was coming up with the ending for the last issue. We can talk about that more later. But once I have those kind of benchmarks, then I figure out how to tell the story as I'm going. It helps keep it fresh to me, because I'm worried that if I write a full script for myself, I will be far less interested in drawing it, because I've locked things down. Now on creator-owned books, as opposed to stuff I do for Hasbro, where that's had to be approved, so I can't deviate from the script that much.
Right.
Here I can say, oh, hey, I'm going to throw this scene in because I didn't realize I needed it, but the story really needs it. And there's nobody to question me. My editor at IDW can question me, but he didn't question much. So. But my goal. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that I don't think that I've talked to several comic writers over the years, and at least the 2 or 3 years the Pullback's been around. I don't think anyone has ever said that they use Post-it notes for scripting. That's kind of cool.
You know, it came about from Love and Capes, where there's 2 jokes on a page. So, and I trained as an artist, so I just think visually, and I put the Post-it notes up, and I can look, page by page. I'll put 24 to 48 Post-it notes up, because Love and Capes was 24 pages, and there were 2 jokes, And I would write, the jokes I had for the end and the middle, and it made it really easy to move things around. Like, oh, this Dark Blade scene needs to happen a little bit earlier, so I can make this scene happen here. Some of the notes were tremendously unhelpful because I'm horrible to myself. And I'll write things like something funny happens here, which is nowhere near as much of a help as you might think. But I was putting in jokes like, because with Love and Capes there were jokes that were actually just jokes and meant to be funny, and then there were jokes that furthered the plot. So occasionally you would know that, I need to have a scene of them in the car because I need to establish how they're getting from point A to point B. So you need to put a joke in the car. I don't know what that joke is, but that's where that joke has to take place. So that's what the Post-it note was telling me. And mostly on the last issue of Long Distance, I had every page plotted out, and I had vaguely what happened on each page, and it was just a pacing thing. Plus, there's a double page spread at the end of Long Distance, and it meant that I couldn't move that more than 2 pages at a time because it has to fall on the right space to hit a double page spread. So there could only be an odd number of pages before that, because if I put one more page in, the double page spread suddenly wraps around the page, and that's not going to work. So it allowed me to move things around visually to make sure that everything happened when it was supposed to, and that I had enough pages, and that I wasn't. Sometimes scenes go on longer than I think they are going to, so it helps me keep focused on what stuff has to happen and what stuff isn't going to happen yet, and it just helps me see the whole book.
Absolutely. You are a graduate of the Joe Kubert School of Cartoon and Graphic Art. What was that experience like?
You ever hear of Vietnam?
Yeah, the one we lost.
Yeah. It's very much boot camp for artists. I don't know what Vietnam was like. I'm not a time traveler, nor have I ever been in the military. But I very much enjoyed going. I am very, very glad that I went. I had a epiphany a few years ago where, actually, and it clarified just in the last year, Joe taught us how to do everything. And there is a point where you think that is the wrong way to go. You're like, no, comic book editors only want to see that you can draw. They don't want to see that you can ink. They can't comprehend all that stuff. Joe made sure we could do everything. He trained us to be Will Eisner, and I've always appreciated the education. I currently really appreciate that kind of mindset because it allows me to do things like Long Distance and Love and Capes, where my coloring is good. It's not great, but it's better than it's probably about average. But it also means that I don't have to pay a colorist. I don't have to pay a letterer. I don't have to pay an artist. When I get a stupid idea to do something, I don't have to convince anyone else. It gives me a kind of creative freedom that a lot of people don't have, where if you are a comic book writer with no art skills, you have to find someone to work with, and finding that person can be very difficult, as opposed to me, where I'm like, oh, well, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to run away and not finish this book without letting me know. So, I keep really good tabs on my artist. And being an artist writer, it's a weird relationship sometimes. It is very important to me that I don't write scenes that I want to draw or don't want to draw. The scene has to be the scene, and then you draw the scene that has to be. So, like I told you, I was on a deadline crunch on the last issue, and I came back from some convention, and I'm like, all right, what page is up today? Oh, they're at a wedding. It's nothing but crowds. Awesome. But I never changed it. There was no point where the artist who didn't want to draw a crowd scene got to say, hey, I don't want to draw a crowd scene. It was, this is the scene that has to be written. It has to take place here, and these things have to happen. So do the scene that's written. So I like having that conflict between those two sides of the creative coin, but I like knowing that neither one of them gets to win all the time.
Right.
The story should win.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And after all, no one likes drawing desks.
Yes. I tweeted about that, and I didn't actually realize it when I did it, but there's a scene that takes place in a school where Carter does a career day, and I managed to do it without drawing any desks. And if I don't point it out to you, you don't realize that there are no desks in the scene. But there are no desks in the scene, and that made it go a little faster.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, I just had a question and I forgot it already. So with the... Oh, I know what it was. From your bio on your website, I'm stealing this. You ever figure out who the hell Charles Gorin is?
Yes, I know exactly who Charles Gorin is.
That's the That's the $50,000 question right there.
It was the $64,000 question.
Oh man, so folks, right before we started the interview, I'm like, where can I go to find out more about this guy before I actually talk to him? Because even though I've read, your long distance series and I've just started loving capes, I still didn't know a hell of a lot more about you, and I didn't want to come into this blind. So I'm like, I go to Google and I'm like, okay, Comic Vine, Comic Book DB. Oh, his own website. Duh, that would probably have something about him, And I'm reading. I'm like, his art was in ads for Prilosec, okay, and he was on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, okay. As soon as I saw that, I went to YouTube immediately. Couldn't find it.
That's good to know.
All right, so I know we're talking about comics. This is a comic show, but I have to ask, because I don't remember when this episode was, so you'll have to tell me, which version of Millionaire were you on, and what was that experience like?
It was the first version of the first season of the Meredith Vieira show.
Okay.
Which, for my money, if you were going to be on the show, is the perfect show to be on, because there was no fastest finger. So it meant that if you got a call to be on the show, you got a call to be on the show, you were going to get questions, and that was awesome. They still paid for everything, so they brought me out, they put me up, they gave me a per diem. And then they did it for the entire length of the trip. We recorded it in November of 2002, and then it aired in April of 2003. Because that's when you get your money. The money comes 30 days after the episode airs, and it was an awesome, terrifying experience. I was very much playing for 32. I figured that was a respectable number. You live in fear of going out dumb.
Yeah.
And there are people, and it's harder than people think, because when you're on the show, there was some guy in front of me who, he got a question about which of these is not a sacrament in the Catholic Church, and he 50-50'd it, and he stared at the question for so long that he didn't see the negative anymore. So he answered the wrong question. He had the right answer, but he answered which one was a sacrament and which one wasn't. So you're terrified of screwing up like that. My $64,000 question was, Charles Gorin quit his law practice in the 30s to become an expert in this: poker, bridge, billiards, or golf. And it's bridge. He wrote the Gorin on Bridge column, which I did not know. My lifeline that I called was supposed to be on the internet, and it was a little slow to get on. And he said, I think it's bridge, but I'm not sure. I thought it was poker, because I thought he was like Gabe Kaplan. And I figured that if I'm going out on a guess, I'm going to go out on mine, somebody else's. So that's what happened. But there's a guy, too, after me who went farther, and we figured that you don't get your own individual set of 15 questions, because then the guy who's writing the $1 million question is really ticked off that his work never gets seen. It's just you get the next part off the stack. Yeah. So if I had gotten his questions, I could have gotten to where he got to 125.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I would have been smart enough to stop like he was. Because there's a point where if you had 3 questions, you have a 1 in 64 shot of winning $1 million just based on dumb luck. And how do you not take that? Because there were people who said, oh man, what was it like to lose $32,000 on TV? I'm like, wait a second. I won $32,000 on national TV on an all-expense paid trip to New York talking to Meredith Vieira. How was your November 8th? So it just depends on how you look at it. But my $32,000 question was, what comic strip created Sadie Hawkins Day? And I can tell you on what page of what book I know that answer from. And you get that question and you go terrified, because you can't go out on a comic question. You will never live that down, Thom Zahler. You cannot go out on a comic question. and I visibly relax after that. It was funny to me because they always have to have more contestants, so they always bring in a new group every time. And the day that I was on, the people who were new, because they have closed circuits. They run the feed from the show in the contestant green room, and it's terrifying because you don't actually know when the next episode is going to start. I still tense up when I hear the Millionaire music, and it's its own particular form of torture. And you don't know when you're going to go on. You know who's in the chair, you know who's in the wings, and you know the next person they're going to call out of the room. But you don't know. You know, there's 12 of you in the group. You don't know if you're number 6 or number 8. There are lots of laws about being on a game show, and so I was just nervous throughout the entire thing. And the people who were new in our group watched me on TV, and they said, "Oh man, he is so calm. How is he doing this?" And the people who knew me said, "You don't understand. He should be making jokes right now. He is terrified," which is pretty accurate. Having done it once, I would love to do it again. I mean, it's one of those things that benefits from a lot of hindsight. Although, ironically, there used to be a Millionaire game at Disney World, which I accidentally won, or I accidentally got picked for, because I have a friend who said that, "Oh, I could have gotten farther than you on Millionaire." I'm like, "No, you couldn't." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You didn't try out. That was part of it." So I wanted him to. He and I, they do this fastest finger thing, and I wanted him to get called just because I wanted him to go through it. You know, even in a small way. And I wound up getting called, and then I went out. I went out on the $32,000 question and left with like $1,000 or 1,000 points and some Disney pin prizes. So if I had to go out badly, I'd much rather do it at the Disney World version, where the best you're going to win is a cruise, as opposed to the Millionaire version. Yeah. Because I wound up the money I won on the show was a down payment on my house. So
very cool, very cool. Yeah, no, when I read that on the bio, I'm like, oh man, now I have to make the Ken Jennings joke, because he went out he went out on FedEx when the answer was H&R Block. I think I think the question was, what company works the longest or the hardest for for 4 months out of the year, and
okay.
And, I think that's what the Jeopardy question was, and I remember the answer being H&R Block, but he had written FedEx, and I'm like, oh, dude.
There's stuff that makes sense in your head.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so Long Distance. It's 4-issue miniseries from IDW Publishing. Where did you get the... tell us about the genesis of the series. Like, I know you mentioned earlier that you had written it out before you had done... Is what the comic became the story you originally wrote when you did the pitch?
Kind of. So in 2003, some 12 years ago, I got involved in a long-distance relationship. And it ended not long... It ended a couple months before I wrote the pilot, because it was a way of getting some things out. There were a lot of things about that relationship which I still think were pretty good, and the story in particular of what happened I thought was interesting. So I changed a bunch of details, but the first version, the sitcom pitch, is very autobiographical. It's probably too autobiographical. And my thought was in doing it as... Yeah, and my thought, because he is straight up a cartoonist in that one. But my thought in doing it as a sitcom was that eventually, at the end of 7 years, they would find a place to get the idea. So I'm going to have to spoil a lot if I keep talking about this. So we're going to keep talking about this, give people a chance to run away, or okay.
All right. Here's what we'll do, because I've never done this in an interview before. We're going to take a quick break, give you guys a chance to get ready, because Tom is going to spoil the hell out of Long Distance. We'll be back after this.
Hey, this is Thom Zahler, creator of Long Distance, and you are listening to The Pull Bag.
Lois, I'm home. I had a train derailment in Canada. An orphanage fire in London and a dam broke in India. Did you make something for dinner? Oh, my gosh! What happened?
Lex Luthor.
The rat.
Where's Lois?
She was here just a second ago.
Probably scared witless, poor thing.
Don't worry. I'll have you out of that thing in no time. Okay, let's see now. Do I disconnect the black wire or the white one?
Don't worry, I'll save you. What do you think?
Oh,
What do I think? Lois, I think you got some splaining to do.
Clarky, if we're going to be partners and we're going to be married, I want to be part of the act.
Lois, there are things I do you can do. Me, Superman.
Me, super wife.
us super in trouble. Could you hold this argument till later and get us out of here?
I knew this was going to happen. First you know who I am, then you want to fire me, next thing you're going to fire yourself in the head.
Uh-oh. Wee.
Ay, caramba! You exploded them.
Oh, Clarky. Well, I can explain why they exploded.
Ay, ay, ay. Hola.
And we're back, and Tom is going for $64,000. No, sorry. Yeah. All right, so you have been significantly warned, everybody. Tom is about to spoil the heck out of Long Distance. Take it away, sir.
All right. So the idea that happens in the big double page spread, the idea that these two people chase themselves around the country for a good 7 years, that was always the plan for the book. Because the thing that bothers me about a lot of romantic comedies on TV is, first of all, they make it will they or won't they, which if you don't do it right, and so far the only show I've seen that really did it right was Castle. If you don't have a really strong plan for what to do after they get together, you're going to be floundering. So Long Distance is never about are they going to get together, it's about how do they get together. And famously on Friends, Ross is making a list of flaws in Jennifer Aniston so that he can figure out who he wants to go out with. And he writes down fat ankles, which ain't in any way true. And she finds the list, and it's this very contrived sitcom reason to break these people up. And but there are actually good, if you're going to do this, there are actually good ways to break them up. You don't have to write it this dumb. So with them living in separate cities, I have a built-in reason why they're apart. And then I figured that their jobs were both such that eventually one of them would move, and then the other one would get a job that they have to move for. And while they both love each other, they both love their careers. So it's that conflict which keeps them moving around. The big ending, though, that happens where you find out that he doesn't have a long-distance relationship. He has a long-distance life. That came about for the comic. It's actually my friend Tony Felice who... We were talking about it, I think, last year at New York Comic Con, and he says your ending has to be big. It has to be. It can't just be that they get together in a place. There's got to be some unique solution, and I really thought about it, and that was I think that was the big thing that turned me on it and finally had me. It's what gave me the structure of the comic book, because unlike the pilot, the comic book has that framing sequence. The pilot actually starts out in the airport. The comic book starts out in the airport with Carter talking about this relationship that he may or may not be in. And it is very clearly written to be very ambiguous, that you don't know if the relationship is over or not. It specifically takes place in Chicago, so that he could be coming from the relationship just ending. You know, he may be passing through on his way to somewhere else, but it's designed to give you that overwhelming sense of dread that this is not going to work out well, or that it might not work out well. And then the reveal is that the two of them just decided to steer into the curve, steer into the skid, and just keep moving around with each other. And that once I had that, I'm like, okay, this is how it happens. Then this happens in the first issue. This happens in the second issue. Things start to go south in the third issue, and then they have to make this decision in the fourth issue. So that's what gave me the structure for it.
Awesome. As I was reading through my multiple readings of the first 3 issues, what I noticed, and this is probably my own perception on the series, so take it with a grain of salt, I'm like, oh my god, this is Office Space meets Chasing Amy.
Really? Okay.
Well, because between the two of them, he has his own ad agency with his buddy Tim, and she works in a dungeon. She's a rocket scientist, for those that don't know. She works in a dungeon of some university or something or other, and I'm like, oh man, if we only had a copier scene. If we only had a copier scene. Go ahead.
I hadn't thought of that. Because the two things that informed what happened with those characters is, one, I did spend a lot of time working in an ad agency before I went freelance. And there's one point where I was talking with my buddy Mike, and it was when I was starting to figure out that I wanted to leave the job and go off on my own. And he and I and his wife were talking, and this idea popped in my head that I could take him with me, that we could start our own agency and be independent, and I could get to work with him, and it would be awesome. And we wound up not doing it, and I don't think I ever mentioned it. It was just an idea in my head. I'm glad it never happened, because the career that I have is much different than a career where I'm dealing with multiple people who are depending on me to bring in more revenue, things like that. But I wanted to take that idea of two friends running a business and use it to tie Carter to Columbus. Because to me, that's an interesting conflict that is not in the original pilot. In the original pilot, he's straight up a cartoonist like I am, and he can live wherever he wants if he wants to. Here, there's very much this idea that I can't leave my best friend. He's got a kid. He's got another one on the way. I can't abandon him. And that gives a really, really firm reason to keep Carter in Columbus. And the same way with Lee in the original pilot, she's a model who's got like a day job. But in the new version, I wanted to give her a better career. I wanted to give her a career that I could write things about, and that was a little, sexist is the wrong word, but I wanted to pick like an interesting career, and I decided on rocket scientist because NASA is affiliated with Fermi Labs, I think, out in Chicago, and I thought that would be really interesting. And I have a friend. Her name is Lisa. She is I know her through Twitter and through some mutual friends, and she was my reference point. And I said, hey, because mostly I figured that I would give Lee this job where she had a friend that she could talk to. And what she was doing science-wise wasn't so much as important as, that she was in an office with somebody else and could do things. And when Lisa started telling me what her career would be like, because initially the question came about, like, I don't know what her office looks like. How many lab coats kind of thing, what does her office look like? What do I have to draw? What would she be doing as she's talking to her friend about other things? And the way she described it created such a world for me that it was almost impossible not to write about it. Because for what Lee's a postdoctorate candidate, and for what she's doing, she would have a crappy office, be working for a professor who might not necessarily appreciate her. She'd be working with people who she has authority over but can't actually get to do anything. And it's a job that renews like every 2 or 3 years, and you're always looking for more grants, and you're always looking for like the next place that's going to hire you. And once I had that, the idea that I had this built-in thing where she has one career path in mind, and then she gets to have a chance to have a much better one, but it means moving. I just thought that was great, and it gave me visual contrast between Carter and Tim's office, which in my head is Michael Douglas's office from Disclosure, because that's just this beautiful Seattle hardwood office with brick on the walls. It gave Lee this really dank dungeony office, but it was so much fun to play with. There was make jokes about it being too cold or too hot, and I put a couple standpipes right in the middle of her office for no reason whatsoever, because it just that's how horrible her world is right now.
And see, the funny thing is, again, this goes back to my perception of the mashup that I mentioned earlier. I know Carter and Tim's office is really, really nice, and when I first was reading through the book, I'm like, wow, this is kind of like Holden and Banky's place in New Jersey. It really is. It's just one of those things. And so as I'm going through and reading the series, I'm wondering, okay, so their first and second date. The first date is he goes to Chicago. The second date is she comes to Columbus.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout that entire time, I saw so many points, because at one point or another in my previous life, I've been in a long-distance relationship myself. There were so many points in between the first and second date where I'm like, oh crap, he's going to throw something in that's just going to ruin everything between the two of them. And you didn't. You this is by, ladies and gentlemen, I actually say this in my written review. Anyone wants a guide to dating, do not go out and get a book, Dating for Dummies. Get this series, because you basically show all the positives of the relationship, and then when you do mix in, the happenstances, like there's you'll have to remind me, I think it's issue 3 where Tim calls him and says, oh yeah, we need to redo that entire catalog.
Oh no, that's the end of issue 2.
Okay, it's I've read it so much it's running all together.
Okay.
But yeah, it's the end of issue 2 where Tim calls Carter and says, oh yeah, by the way, while Monica did do a good job, the client isn't exactly happy with the job that she did, so we need this by Monday. And I'm like, okay, so this is that moment where this one hiccup is going to basically ruin their entire relationship. And it doesn't. You pull it the other way and you make it more of a positive. Sure, Lee isn't happy that Carter has to work for the next 22 hours, but just the way that you've done this, man, is just so great. It really is.
Thank you. It comes from part of my theory about relationships. It doesn't work this way, but I think there's one that should be
Yeah.
And I guess in the good ones it comes pretty close. One is that, and I have said this to people. I said, look, I'm not trying to piss you off. Mm-hmm. You should have that as a baseline. So if I do something that annoys you, if I do something that you rubs you the wrong way, don't in any way assume that I meant for that to happen. I'm probably being an idiot. And if you tell me, I will probably fix it, because I haven't thought of this. There's no point in a relationship where you say, I want the person with me to be unhappy. That doesn't work. You're going the other way. The other thing is that there should be some sort of bank for all the things that you do. Mm-hmm. And there is a little bit, but it's hard in the moment to appreciate that, where, when you do something that irritates or offends your partner, I would like them to go, oh, but they did bring me coffee every morning for a week, and they went out and got dinner, and then they did this other thing, where there's enough of a bank of good things going, where you go, oh, the one negative, this is an aberration. This isn't consistent. And there seems to be in a lot of romantic comedies a hair trigger, where it's a situation where Carter can't get out of it, and he very clearly explains why he's in this situation and why he's going to make the choice he's going to make. And it's a well-reasoned, logical argument. He's saying, look, this client is like 30-40% of our business. I know what stuff he wants. I understand his design aesthetic. I'm the only one who can do this. And I have to do this because I employ like 10 people, and I can't lose 30% of my business. And no matter how mad you are that your date has gone horribly wrong, you can't argue with that math. So in Lee being a scientist and just being, I think, a smart and good person, because I wanted to write two people who are good for each other and nice people. She recognizes it. She's in no way happy about it. but she knows that she respects that decision because she's very capable of putting herself in a similar situation and knowing that if that had happened, at her job and he had been out there, that she would probably make the same choice. And then later, her flight gets changed, which cuts even more time off their trip. And Carter reacts kind of the same way. He doesn't, it's not her fault that the airline changed the flight. Mm-hmm. So there's no reason to get mad at the other person. You have to appreciate the time you got with them, and then figure out what to do next. And there's a lot of apologizing that goes on between the two of them for that kind of stuff. But it's not. You're not apologizing because you did something wrong. You're apologizing because you've lost time that you meant to have, and you want that person to know that you wanted it and that you appreciated it.
Right. Absolutely. They always say that, relationships are nothing like what they show in the movies. And that is pretty much true. Because I don't care how many people like Frozen or loved Frozen. Love at first. I don't even want to get into that because it's a whole negative thing for me, but the whole love at first sight thing, I somewhat believe in it, but I am sorry. They went way too fast in that movie. Anyway, the thing with Long Distance is it feels like these two have been together forever. What is the time? Okay, from the first meeting to the first date to the second date until the end, what is the timeline there? Because after the first date, it between the first and the second date, it's about, I think I said in the review, it's about 3 weekends, because there was the weekend he flew out, there was the weekend she couldn't make it, and then the weekend that she did make it. So I said that it's somewhere right under a month that the relationship has taken place, but over the entire story, minus the map at the end, but like the beginning of their relationship, what is the timeline there?
So I played fast and loose with this. I completely admit this, and it's because of the nature of how they get together and stories I didn't want to tell. So they are together for almost a year by the time that they go to that wedding. The third issue has a lot of montages, and when Carter's telling the story, he references that they spend a lot of time with each other, but he doesn't necessarily go into every trip. Right. The thing that happens is there's a snowstorm that snows them in at the airport, which means that it's got to take place in a winter month. Mm-hmm. The problem with setting it in winter is that you have Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's and Valentine's Day. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to do any of those because I wanted the story to be more about what they do on a regular date rather than what they do on a holiday. And a lot of the holidays I covered in Love and Capes. I kind of felt like I had done that part of the story. So it's not that they didn't have Christmas. It's not that they didn't figure out some way to get together for Valentine's Day. It's just that that part of the story wasn't interesting to me. So just from the weather, the fact that the kids in college are, starting to Sunday at the college that they're at, you can put that in late May, early June, and then the wedding is probably a month after that. Mm-hmm. So the timing's all based on weather. I didn't give you a lot of other things, and I wanted to leave this kind of. I didn't want to do an actual I think I did do a montage at one point, but it is just like the implication that they've gotten together more than we're seeing. That their middle is a lot longer.
Right. How it's done in the book, people, and first of all, we're an hour or so something into this interview. If you haven't stopped the interview and gone and looked at the series, do so now. How you tell it in the book through the letters and through some of the bubbles is, like when they have the first date or the second date, or when they're talking on the phone. I think one of the talking on the phone scenes was in between the first and second date, and it ended up being a 3-hour conversation.
Oh, that's at one point. That's between where they meet in the airport and before he decides to go out there for the first time.
Okay, yeah, okay. So it's between the initial meeting and the first date. So you're
Yes.
on the phone for 3 hours, and the way the panels run, if I'm remembering this correctly, is, you say something like, okay, later, and then like 2 or 3 panels later, you're like, more later. Like you don't. I like that you don't specifically say, hey, this is Monday at blah blah blah. What this again reminds me of, and I'm gonna put my own influence on it or my own reference on it here, is, you ever seen that John Cusack, Kate Beckinsale movie, Serendipity?
Oh yeah.
It's exactly what this reminds me of, because I remember when I originally had the DVD when that movie came out. Oh God, years and years ago. I think there's a commentary on it or not, or it might have been a special feature. One of the producers or director or whatever of the film said, "Oh well, when we originally put the screenplay together, it was going to be, this is 10 years, and then now it's 10 years later, where instead of that they say, oh well, this is then and this is, instead of giving it an actual time, they give you a sense of time without saying, hey, this is 10 years before and 10 years after." And that's exactly what you're doing, which, it's just such a refreshing storytelling point. It really is.
And some of it, in terms of the conversation, is I was very conscious of the fact that I'm doing a comic book about people talking. And it visually, that can get really old really fast. There's a lot of things I tried to do. I didn't give people too many, big Aaron Sorkin monologues. I think you just have to be aware of that. So some of the cuts in the big 3-hour conversation is you don't want to read a 3-hour conversation.
Right.
But also, you get in the context of what you see, you know that they've been on the phone forever, and you know that they're talking really easy, and they're not having hang-ups, and they just keep going, and it still gets the point across without necessarily wasting another 5 pages on 2 people talking on phones.
Right. Let's before we kind of wrap this up and get what's going on in the future for you, for what you can talk about, let's talk about the colors in this series, because, man, you use colors so
there are 2.
well. No, well, yeah, okay.
That's true.
As they go along, it's green and orange. But in the beginning, and I think this is because ever since I was a kid, my 2 favorite colors are black and purple. Don't ask me why.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. Don't ask. I don't know.
Because you're super villain. Okay.
Yeah, I'm probably 2 steps away from becoming a supervillain, just like Sheldon Cooper, but who knows? So, in the very beginning of the first issue, we have the airport scene in New York City, and it's all purple, white, and some black, or some. It's mostly purple and white, and I'm like, wow, I've just never seen an artist do colors so well like this, and in this type of, just the way your style is of how you draw the characters, and then the stupid Bat Kid comes up, and like, oh no, this can't be good. Like, wow, what a way to meet a woman. Have Bat Kid take you out. That was hilarious. But had you intentionally put, like, the purple is for New York, the green is for Carter and Columbus, the orange is for Lee in Chicago, was that intentional when you first started, or did that just is that what happened?
I knew that Chicago was going to be orange and Columbus was going to be green. Because I needed 2 colors that I knew would work together well on the page, because while the color tones change, and what they are is they're duotones. So I picked a color, and then I can mix black in with it to get a bunch of different shades. And then there's a second color layer that's just the color. So you get more pure but more muted colors, which show up much more in the background. But I wanted 2 colors that would play well together, because there are scenes in the middle of a page where the color palette will change, indicating where characters are. And since I knew I had those 2 colors picked out, I needed a color for New York. I wanted something cold, since I set it, in the winter. I thought purple was a good choice because it was visually very different than anything else, and it sets up really quickly the idea that hey, these color palettes are going to change, and there might actually be a reason behind it. I may have thought this through. So, and there's actually all sorts of weird rules I had to come up with. So characters, all the word balloons are outlined in like the impact color, whatever color I've decided that the place they're at is.
Mm-hmm.
So in Las Vegas, it's yellow. I think Michigan is a deep blue at one point because that scene is really small. But the idea is that wherever you speak, you pick up the color of your location. But when you're on the phone, your phone is in the color of where it's registered. Mm-hmm. So Carter's phone being in Columbus is always green. Because the first time he went to Chicago and the two of them were texting, I'm like, visually, it doesn't make any sense to give him a green balloon when he's in another city. But it was I wanted to have that shorthand of here's his text. His texts are in green because his phone is registered in 614 area code. So it was figuring out stuff like that, and when colors would change and what things would be in different colors, and what things don't change. But just it very much gives a sense of place, and that's what I was going for. It kind of came about. Somebody showed me a book that I think every chapter was in a different color scheme, and I remember looking at going, hey, that might be a really cool way to do long distance. And honestly, when I did it, I was afraid it would be a little too gimmicky, a little too hey, look at me, I'm being clever. And I think that it judging by the reaction and how well people liked it, I think I really nailed that one. It achieved exactly the effect I wanted. And the other thing that I really like about it is I think part of what I try to do every time I do a new project is I attempt to figure out a new way to handle a situation. So long distance has much more comic book format. It doesn't rely on the 8-page grid that Love and Capes did. And there are other, changing the way the colors are done. That was important. It was a different way of handling it. There's actually, Love and Capes has a tremendous number of background jokes that as I was working on the book, I would throw in to keep me awake as I was working. And I very much didn't want to do that with Long Distance. And it's like when the Pixar guys were doing the bloopers at the end of their films, they did it for the first two, and then they didn't do it again because they said, we don't want that to become our thing. We might do interesting things after the credits or in the credits, but we're not going to fall back on this crutch of always doing this blooper reel. In the same way, I didn't want to fall back on the crutch of, hey, it's this, Doctor Who is showing up in the background, and hey, look at the funny name he gave that restaurant. I wanted to get rid of some of that stuff and kind of work a little purer. In fact, in Love and Capes, every time they're on a computer, it's a screenshot of a real computer. In Long Distance, it's almost geometric, just a set of shapes to get across the idea that they're on a computer. There's one scene where you actually need to be able to read what's on it, and I put in real text. And I fell back and I put a couple jokes in that one. When Lee gets the email, if you look, I think there's an email about the Love and Capes TV show coming out, and then there's a couple other, like a Kickstarter for an Ed DVD set. Because I would very much like to see that. Things like that where, I needed to put a little bit more in it, but I still wanted to look a little simpler and a little more basic because I wasn't trying to hit the level of complexity for the visuals that I did on Love and Capes.
Long Distance, it just seems like just like their relationship at the beginning was so effortless. It just seems like you've done these 4 issues so effortlessly, yet I know there's a whole lot of work that goes into putting something like this together.
Yeah.
The interesting thing here with Long Distance is, as I mentioned earlier, there's so many points in their relationship leading up to the end where you could have put, oh my God, this happened, or oh my God, that happened, and some you did, some you didn't. But what's interesting to me is that they just, like you said, they can't be mad at each other they can be upset about the situation, like with him having to work for that one weekend and whatever else. But man, it is just so refreshing to read a comic like this. We need more long distance.
Well, I'll try to do more. I'm hoping, so there have been 2 books that have come out that the precious little snowflake part of me is disappointed that I didn't know about ahead of time. Because first of all, DC announced they're doing Superman, Wonder Woman. I'm like, I write Love and Capes. What do I have to do to get noticed by you? And then Marvel just recently did Secret Love, part of their Secret Wars thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, for crying out loud, what do I have to do to get a call? I could have written one of these. So.
Yeah. I haven't read, like I said at the beginning of the interview, I'm just now getting into Love and Capes. In my initial thoughts of it are, and I don't know if this is how you planned it. Because I don't have the information in front of me. Sorry, folks.
Okay.
When did Love and Capes initially come out?
2006, I think.
So that was after The Incredibles, right? Because I swear,
yeah.
There's so many. As I'm reading this, I'm like on the first 4 or 5 pages of Love and Capes Volume 1, folks, and I'm like, wow, this is pretty much Incredibles before they had kids.
Yeah,
is that wrong to say?
No, Incredibles was a big influence. Just that general style and Darwin Cook style. In fact, some people tag the Crusader as looking like me because I am also tall with brown hair. The reason the Crusader has brown hair is if I gave him blonde hair, he'd look too much like Mr. Incredible. And I didn't want to give him black hair because then he looks like Superman, and that's a little too obvious. And I didn't. For a bunch of reasons, I didn't want to do another red-haired character for Abby, and I couldn't give her brown hair if he had brown hair because I wanted the visual difference between it. So she wound up becoming a blonde, and he was a brunette specifically because those were the limitations I imposed on myself. But yeah, when the Crusader, if you've got the trade, there is a reproduction of the demo page that I did, which was. It was me doing 1 page of Love and Capes, trying to figure out the style and how I was going to handle things, and it is very different. It's still got the 8-panel grid, and it's basically the joke. You probably haven't gotten there yet, where they're on the couch, and it's early in the relationship, and she starts asking what his weakness is, and he's like, "Why do you want to know that?"
I haven't gotten to that point yet.
So that was the scene that I set up, and then eventually. Yeah, and there's actually there will be a long distance trade at some point. There's a demo page that I did for that, which it's just like the proof of concept, and this is what it's going to look like. It's me figuring out what fonts to use and what style to use, and how to design it and how to build it so that it's going to be what I want to do.
Absolutely, awesome. All right, well, I would like to thank Mr. Zahler for taking the time to chat with me here in this interview inside the Pullbag on the GeekCast Radio Network. Make your great escape into comics, and we will catch you next time, folks.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.
All right, folks, I meant to mention in the interview with Thom Zahler that he mentioned his My Little Pony work, and I didn't get a chance to ask you too much about that, but there's a reason that I didn't ask you about your My Little Pony work, is because here inside the Pullbag, coming up in February 2016, we're going to do Fiendship is Friendship February. I don't know, because I don't have information in front of me. Did you write any of the Fiendship 5-issue series?
I did not. I wrote two of Friends Forever, and I did the 2-parter of Friendship is Magic that brought back Flutterbat.
Okay. So, people, you're getting an advanced notice of what's going to happen here inside the Pullbag in February 2016. As I said, it's going to be Fiendship is Friendship February. We're going to have 4 podcasts. We're going to talk about My Little Pony Tales Volumes 1 and 2. We're going to talk about the 5-issue miniseries Fiendship is Magic, where they talk about the villain, where they do all the villains. And then in one show, we're going to review Friendship is Magic and Friends Forever Volume 1. And we'll probably do some sort of Friendship is Magic February each year that the podcast goes on, if it goes on and on and on. So who knows? All right, folks, make your greatest game in the comics, and we will catch you next time.
Hello?